Good morning, everyone. Bom dia. Good morning. Bom dia. Everyone here speaks English? Because this one is going sort of. What languages do you speak? English? Oh, you speak English. Perfect. So yes, this talk will be in English, but very much in the spirit of Blumet, com direito à mistura. We can mix and stop in the it's very much my frame of mind. I'm going to start by introducing Fernando Coimbra, our consul here, our representative here in Brazil. Fernando was just asking me before what language I think in, and I don't know, I think it's all combined, it's like a short circuit. So, Fernando, can you please come over and say some words?
Thank you, Ingrid. Good morning, bom dia, hi to everyone. Welcome everyone. Yes, today in English and maybe a little Portuguese. You came here to listen to Djamila Ribeiro, so I'm going to be very brief. Just to say thank you for Metropolis Bleu for having invited one of the most brilliant intellectuals, scholars in Brazil, who is fortunately now close to us here in Boston at MIT teaching there. So thank Metropolis Bleu. Thank you, Ingrid Bejerman, who has been really an engine to promote Latin American studies, reflection, authors in Metropolis Bleu. And this year we were very fortunate to have Djamila Ribeiro accept the invitation to come over and speak to us. And I hope this is the first of many. I'm already in talks with Ingrid to ensure that next year and the following we will always have a strong footprint in the festival, which, by the way, is really one of the pearls in Montreal. It's really spectacular. The high level of thinking that is going on here in this hotel during this weekend. So without further ado, I would just like to say that today when I opened the newspaper, I was very glad to see that Djamila Ribeiro was selected. 2 of her works were selected among the 25 most significant nonfiction work in the 21st century. Yes. Yes, so congratulations, Djamila, for that. You have really been a light in the universities in Brazil and now in the US. And I hope you can tell us a bit about your thoughts, and just to say that we are really very proud of what you've been doing. And congratulations, and Ingrid, congratulations to you, to Metropolis Bleu, and long live Latin American studies and Brazilian studies and authors like yourself. Thank you. I was supposed to invite her to the stage.
This was also kind of improvised because when we heard the news this morning, and if I may just say, I'm the one, and I was supposed to thank the consul for the support. Without the Brazilian consul of the Instituto Guimarães, Rosa, this would not be possible. Bringing Djamila, she's a star, and it's not cheap. We were able to do it, as it shouldn't be. May she win all the millions of dollars. So on that note, if anybody also wants to support the foundation, I'm a programmer, I have a very tiny budget, so there's only so much that you could do. So if you could help us out, also your input, and especially most of all your presence here, that would be great. So I look forward to seeing you next year. But for now, Djamila, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Montreal. Now, this talk in the city of many languages and cultures, Djamila is now speaking in English, the professor. So Djamila is a Brazilian intellectual of language, a philosopher. And a philosopher of language, a philosopher of society, of philosophy, which is a thing, the philosophy of the philosophy, a thinker. But from Portuguese to English is a completely different world, and both are also colonial languages. So Djamila, tell us a little bit about, I told Djamila, my first question that I was thinking this morning is Marilyn Monroe used to say, it takes me 3 hours to become Marilyn. I'm a professor myself, it also takes me a bit of time before I come to speak. So Djamila, how long does it take you to become Professor Djamila Ribeiro, MIT visiting scholar Martin Luther King's? Like, how long does it take for you to become that?
So good morning, bom dia. It's a pleasure to be here in this important festival. I'm so glad to be here. Ingrid, thank you and our ambassador for the invitation. Wow, to take how long it take to be Djamila? Wow, took too much years actually to become Djamila. I'm the first generation to go to university. So I come from a working class family, a black working class family in Brazil. And it's important, I don't know if you're familiar with the context in Brazil, but Brazil was the last country in America to end slavery. So for many, many centuries, for many, many years, the black population haven't had the right to access education, formal education in Brazil. So I am the first one in my family to go to university due to public policies in terms of education. So it took so long to me to become, not to become Djamila, but to be in the places that I am today. But when I woke up this morning, took, I guess, 2 hours to prepare myself.
One less than Marilyn.
And to think, oh my God, I have to speak in English. My personality is completely different in English. So yes, I meditate a little bit. And yes, and I read the news, and everybody was calling me, did you see the news that your book was selected? And I was like, calm down, I have a talk. So when I come back, I answered everyone. So I had to, to breathe and to be ready to be here with you now.
Thank you, Djamila. I guess that what I wanted to say is that there's Djamila the person and there's Djamila the persona, the character, and also the name, the byline, because, we have now with many writers that we just mentioned by name, like we say Djamila, Chimamanda, and everybody knows who you're talking about, which is, I think, an extremely powerful thing. So one of the concepts, of the many concepts that Djamila contributed to academia, Black feminist studies, but in general the social sciences and humanities, is her concept of Lugar De Fala, which is a philosophical concept that I think cannot be understood without philosophers like post-structuralist philosophers like Jacques Derrida, for example, deconstruction, people that really understand like how language functions or what speaks through the language. It's not just Lugar De Fala, I'm going to lose my place to speak, or it's not at all the way that lazy people who are uncomfortable don't understand that you would not talk about this with Heidegger, for example. I cannot read Heidegger, it's in German, half of it is in Greek, but I understand that many of the concepts of being in time in his philosophy are complex, that are not necessarily literal. Like when he says time is a very particular conception of time. So Djamila, tell us a little bit about where you're at right now with the concept of Lugar De Fala in the sense of as a term, but also in terms of the translation, in terms of the place. I guess what I want to ask you is we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but now it's an English version. How much explaining or pre-explaining, let's just put it this way. People, Lugar De Fala also has a huge bibliography, and people have not read the bibliography in order to understand. I'm a professor myself, so I get very irritated, and then that she takes upon what we call the labor of explaining this when the students should do the work on their own, So tell us a little bit about Djamila, how it is to teach this in the United States or in a more than North American and Anglo context at MIT, because I'm sure Concordia or McGill would be different, but at MIT, how and especially lastly, anyway, start with that and then.
Okay. Well, in the US, it's still a challenge to explain the concepts because in Brazil, people are more familiar with the concept because the book was published in Brazil in 2017 and became a bestseller. So, but even though in Brazil, there are some part of the population that try, or I think they resist to understand the concept. But for this part of the society in Brazil, I don't explain anymore because you can read the book. So it's not my job to explain over and over and over again for people who do not want to understand. And especially because these people, they don't want to read, as you said, the bibliography, because I didn't coin the concept Lugar de Fala. What I did in my work was to trace the genealogy of the concept and try to make visible the origins of the term, it comes from the Black feminist thought, feminist theory, race theory as well. So I mobilize a lot of authors to explain the concept. So, and I think that most of the people, they are not familiar with the work of Black intellectuals in Brazil. So they refuse to read and to understand what we are saying. But in the other hand, there are a lot of people in Brazil that truly understood the concept. And it's so funny because when some people post something on social media, misunderstanding the concept, there are people there, it's not accurate. Djamila didn't say that, so I don't have to do that anymore. So it's good in Brazil. But in the US, it's a challenge because they are not familiar with the work of Latin American scholars. In the US, the knowledge is so centered in the US. Even though among Black scholars, they are not familiar with the work of Latin American scholars. So for me, it's a challenge because I have to explain, and like I am explaining for a child sometimes, because I think that this imperialism framework, in one hand, make them not be open to other kinds of knowledge, and they don't know. So they don't know, and sometimes they don't want to know, or they think that their productions are better than our productions. So when I am in the US and I say, Brazil, what do you think? What comes in your mind? What pop up in your mind when I say the word Brazil? And usually people say, Brazil, carnival, samba, feijoada, caipirinha. And I say, yes, I love carnival, I love samba, yes, but there too much more in Brazil. So when people look up to Brazil, they do not look up in terms of knowledge or culture in general. They fix us in stereotypes. So they think that they know about Brazil, but actually they don't know about. So it's difficult, especially because I am an Afro-Brazilian woman. They do not expect a woman like me, that who look like me, in this kind of position, teaching at MIT. So for them, it's a surprise. So how come you speak English? Wow. Wow, you are so intelligent. And I think, why are you so surprised? So I have to not only explain the concepts, but I think that in the US, I have to explain myself as an Afro-Brazilian woman with a book translated into English.
More than explain yourself,
So
if I may say, you have to justify your existence in a way, right?
Exactly, because I think they were not ready for this kind of presence. So usually Brazilians that have the opportunity to travel abroad or to teach abroad usually are white Brazilians that comes from middle class family, rich families. So they can accept when they see a white Brazilian there, but an Afro-Brazilian woman there teaching in the same position that they are not so familiar. And all the time I have to say, oh, yes. Oh, but how come? What's your background? So what do you do? So I have to deal with all these things in the US all the time.
I can imagine. I feel like addressing you like professor, because if we were in a more academic setting, that's what I would call you. So Professor Ribeiro, where do you situate your work, or where is your work situated and received in terms of in disciplinary terms? Is it in literary studies? Is it in critical race theory? Is it across, like in the social sciences and humanities? How is it received in the US? And especially I want you to touch on something that we were discussing over dinner. I love to say that we had that we had this discussion over dinner, that we were talking about the concept of key concept, which is intersectionality by Kimberly Crenshaw, that is the basis of critical race theory, but it comes from legal studies. And Djamila was mentioning that concept is actually a Brazilian scholar that I did not know that was a precursor to that concept, you know? So tell us a little bit about, in other words, like about this reorganization or dismantling of the humanities and social sciences as we know it, and especially where you are in a technical scientific university. MIT is more of a university that's known for like the mathematics, and which is not that mathematics isn't connected to philosophy, but tell us a little bit about where your work is situated in the US at the moment.
Yes, it's a very good question, because even in Brazil, I've studied philosophy, but even in philosophy, what I do is not common. So when I was studying at São Paulo Federal University, where I graduated and I got my master's, it was very difficult to me because I was doing something so different, and my professors, they didn't have the background to be my advisors, for instance. So I have one professor who was very open, and so he decided to study the authors that I was researching. So since I was studying, for me it was difficult, because in Brazil, the academia is very Eurocentric, and in philosophy, you can imagine. So during my graduation, they presented to us the thought of white European men. When I asked the professor about African philosophy, he said, there is no such thing as African philosophy. What are you talking about?
In Brazil, they
In Brazil. So they are very Eurocentric in philosophy. So when I asked about Simone de Beauvoir, because there was a professor who was teaching about Sartre, and I said, I want to study Simone de Beauvoir. And he said, Beauvoir, Sartre's wife? And
wow.
so
He also didn't do his reading.
Yes, and I said, wow, I will have trouble here to study what I want to study, because I wanted to study female philosophers. So it was very difficult to me. The academia was very hostile environment to me, because they were saying, oh, you are not doing philosophy. What you are doing is not that. You're not, being so accurate. So it was very difficult to me. So even in Brazil, I don't know how to explain where my work is, because I believe in the multidisciplinaries. I don't believe in just one thing. And in my work, of course, my background is philosophy, but I quote works from sociologists, from activists, from different fields. For me, it's important to my work be embedded in all that fields, because enrich my own perspective of the world and enrich my academic work. So in the US, I guess people are not so concerned about that as in Brazil, because, she's a philosopher and she mobilized a lot of authors, and it's okay. So at MIT, I was invited by the Women Gender Studies Literature Department and Philosophy Department at the same time. So I'm representing the three departments. So because I think my work reflects that, these kind of multidisciplinary perspectives. But in the US, people are not so concerned, and I think they mobilize more than in Brazil. In Brazil, I think people, they stay more in boxes, especially in philosophy. So in the US, I think it's different. And for me, in this sense, it's easier to explain my work than in Brazil.
That's good to know from my end, because I teach here, not in Brazil, and my background is here, and at McGill and Concordia, my PhD is from McGill, but I teach at Concordia. And
I'm sorry, about intersectionality.
Yes, I was going to go back to that, but
yes. Intersectionality was a concept coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She's professor at Columbia University in New York City. Yes. At law school.
Because I also make sure my students understand that this is a legal concept, it's not a humanities concept,
No, it's a legal concept, but actually the Black feminists in the US I think, appropriated of
Yeah,
the
what
concept.
I mentioned, sorry, let me correct myself. When you mentioned the genealogy, it comes from legal discourse.
Yes. And Kimberly Crenshaw is a black feminist. But in Brazil, Lélia Gonzalez, at the same time, she was reflecting about racism and sexism in the Brazilian society. She was not exactly using the concept intersectionality, but when you read her work, you can see that she was talking about intersectionality. But as she was writing, reflecting in Brazilian Portuguese, her work didn't become international. So when people cite the work of black feminists, the most important black feminists, they do not cite Lélia Gonzalez. And I think this is the problem, because the politics of translations are still colonial politics, in the sense that they do not translate the work of Brazilian feminists. So sometimes when I am in conversation with feminists here in the US and they are explaining concepts, proposing things, I remember in 2019 I was in Berkeley in a conversation with other feminists from US, and they were talking about transnational struggle and how it will be important to do that. And my answer was, well, Lélia Gonzalez in the 80s, she was proposing the concept of Americanity, Americanidade. She was proposing a transnational struggle. Oh, really? I didn't know that. And I said, yes, it's because you have to start translating the work of Brazilian feminists. And I think that because they are not aware about our work, it's important to say it's not mean that our work do not exist. We exist. Lélia Gonzalez was in the 80s proposing pioneering reflections. And if here in the global north, people are not aware about that, I think people here have to start to question themselves. So only what we produce actually is knowledge. What is valid knowledge? And this question is very important, because when people think that only their productions are valid knowledge, they are losing too much. They are losing the chance to learn from different perspectives. They are losing the opportunity to enrich their academic work. And I think we have to put ourselves more in a position of exchanging knowledge instead of imposing knowledge. And for us in Brazil, in the global south, we have to deal all the time with this kind of framework. People trying to impose the knowledge, or trying to build hierarchies of knowledges. And I think it's important to break with this idea of hierarchy of knowledge. And that's why Lélia Gonzalez is not known here in the global north.
And hasn't yet been translated to English, right?
No,
She's on my
first
book I'm going to read tomorrow
English
morning.
yet, even though her work. And it's funny
I did
because
not know this myself.
there are some black feminists in the US that they know the work, the Lélia Gonzalez work, they quote sometimes, especially the feminists that travel to Brazil often, but still, they do not publish the work of Lélia Gonzalez in the US. And I think it's a question that these scholars, they have to ask themselves.
And thank you, Djamila got to the crux of the purpose of this talk, which is also who gets to speak. You know, who's the person who's in the Foucauldian sense of authority, who's the author and who has the power to speak, because knowledge and power are completely connected. And I wanted to talk a bit about the circulation of knowledge through the colonial languages, in the sense that in order for us to talk about discourse analysis here in North America, our ideas are more received in English than they were in France from the post-structuralists, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, like all of them, the translation to English. And it's funny because Lélia Gonzalez was before, like she was working also before this work was crossing the ocean from France to, because they hadn't even read Derrida here, or Foucault, or Baudrillard, Lacan, Jacques Lacan, exactly, you know, which is post-structuralist psychoanalysis. And I'm half Argentinian. Lacan is very mainstream in Argentina, but not anywhere else, you know. And so these ideas, Djamila, how do you situate your knowledge? You're still operating within, my first question, you're still operating within colonial languages, French tradition, in English, and still, as much as it's Brazilian, Brazil, Portuguese is hardly a minority language. And that's my first question. And the second question is, what is the place that you find in your experience, and this goes especially my pet peeve here in Canada, because there's zero, I mean, a very small place here for Brazilian studies, Portuguese studies. In our 4 universities, I mean, the French ones are better, but Concordia, McGill, the space is reduced. And in U of T, I mean, whatever, there's not that much, let's just put it this way, people aren't dying to learn Portuguese at Concordia, you know, even though it's an extremely multilingual university. My question is, like, how do you find the space for knowledge of Brazil, like what we had yesterday, that people actually want to learn Portuguese, your last question from the panel yesterday, and speak to you in Portuguese? I learned French to read Jacques Derrida in university. I came partly to learn, my 4th language is French. You know, why are people not learning Portuguese? Or like, what's the space of Portuguese in the US? And in Canada it's inexistent, but in the US, in terms of like people actually making the effort, I mean, if for example I was at MIT, can I go take courses in Portuguese to then be able to read? And how many people take the initiative to actually learn the language, you know, as we had yesterday, like a law student that actually learned it through music and came with a question prepared. That takes the effort, you know, but you also have to have the space in the department to do that, right?
Yes, at MIT, actually, there is a Portuguese department. The professor is a friend of mine, Professor Nilma Dominique. And it's interesting because it's possible to create these bridges, because my professor hosts, because at MIT in this program, Martin Luther King Jr. Visiting Professor Program, you have a host professor. And my professor, Joaquin Terrones, he's been doing a very interesting work about 5 years. He chose about 25 students from MIT to travel to Brazil in January and to meet intellectuals in Brazil. They go to terreiros, candomblé, religions, temples. They visit indigenous communities. So it's a very important exchange program that he runs at MIT. And the students that have already gone to Brazil, it's interesting because when they saw that I was there teaching, they were like, oh, I was in Brazil with Professor Joaquin and it was so nice. And they want to know more. Most of my students actually are part of this program because they were already presented to the Brazilian contest. So Professor Joaquin Terrone, he's doing incredible work at MIT. So each year, 25 students travel to Brazil, but to know Brazil beyond the stereotypes. And most of them already knew about me because the work of Professor Joaquin Terrones. So it's possible to do. And because of that, there was an increase of students studying Portuguese at MIT. And MIT, of course, you know, it's a tech university, and that is the humanitarian department. We're not so popular at MIT as the other departments, but the thing is, all the students at MIT, regardless the course, they have to take 8 classes in the humanity department. And it's amazing because it's important to teach that the word, then to not have just a technical view of the word. It's important to them to think, to understand that they are in a society shaped by inequalities. It's very important. So my students, I have students who are studying physics, others are studying engineering, mechanic engineer, and they are there learning about Lélia Gonzalez. It's important to them to expand their views and perspectives. So, but still, the Portuguese department, I guess, in the global language department is the smallest one. And I see how Professor Nilma, she struggles, to keep the department. And because she's Brazilian, she's not Portuguese. So there is also this problem. So, but still, she's doing incredible work she's there about, I guess, 18 years, trying to push more people to learn Portuguese, but still it's the smallest department. And most of the students, they want to learn Spanish. and even Chinese, French, Portuguese is like, oh, it's more if they really want to go to Brazil. And the thing is, most of them, they want to go to Brazil. They don't want to go to Portugal. It's very interesting that. But it still is a challenge, and I think that, I don't know if maybe our governments, I don't know what we should do to support more these kind of initiatives, because it's important, especially for Portuguese speakers, to have this kind of support. But I am living at, I live in Cambridge right now in Massachusetts, and there are a lot of Brazilians over there, about 500,000 Brazilians, of course, before the mass deportation, and now, today, I don't know how much. But for me, it's good to be there, even though in the university I have to speak in English. All of my students, they are from the US. But to live there, it's interesting because I actually can find the Brazilian community. I can go to a Brazilian market and speak in Portuguese. I can go to a Brazilian restaurant. There are Brazilian organizations over there supporting women in situation of domestic violence. So I hold talks with with these organizations. So for me, it's not so bad because I am in a region that are a lot of Brazilians. Where I do my hair, you know, it's a Brazilian salon. I try to support financially the Brazilian community. So for me, it's important to go to a Brazilian market, to do my hair in a Brazilian salon, to do a massage with a Brazilian therapist. And actually, in Massachusetts, you can find a lot of Brazilians there, people who are working class people trying to survive, try to make a living, and especially because in Cambridge there is Harvard and MIT, and there are a lot of Brazilians at Harvard as well. But I felt that most of the academics and the scholars, they don't want to be so close to the others Brazilians. So that is the separation there. So the Brazilians academics and the Brazilians workers. And I didn't want to put myself in this kind of position, although I understand because some Brazilian academics do that, because most of the Brazilians that are there in Massachusetts, they are very conservative. I don't understand, but for me, you know, I don't want to put myself in this kind of position to discriminate other people, although these people are really fascist. But if they are not, if it's possible to have a conversation, I try to have a conversation. The hairdresser, for example, my hairdresser, she's very conservative. And she's, you know, it's interesting to listen to her. And she's evangelical, and she's against the left wing. She hates Lula, the president of Brazil. And I'm there, she's doing my hair, and I listen to her. But why is that? No, it's because that. So for me, it's interesting to try to understand the way they think. And, you know, at the end, I like her. She's a very nice person. But she was raised in a very poor community in Brazil, and she moved to the US to try to have a better life. She's not a fascist. She's just I know, a woman in alienation, and
It's reproducing the discourse that is
reproducing the
embedded in.
discourse. And I think it's important to us not to keep these walls. For me, it's important to find the bridges then where I can reach her. And actually, it was possible to me to reach her and to like her as she likes me. And she follows me now on Instagram. She knows who I am. She knows that I am from Candomblé. For her, is the demon religion. She knows that I voted for Lula. She knows that I am, you know, a feminist. For her, it's like feminist. But even though she likes me, so I think that it's important for the Brazilian academics to try to connect. I know it's difficult, but at the same time, it's important not to, you know, put ourselves in the position of, oh, you are so intelligent and we are progressives. And I'm a black woman. I know that people, even though progressive people can be racist and sexist, I know. So come on. So for me,
In fact, it's even worse
so for
because
me,
they're
it's-
appropriating the discourse of, like, of changing the paradigm for racialized bodies, and there's still, I mean, there's quite a bit of work that they have to do.
Exactly.
Or I say
So
we
for
have
me,
to
it's
do,
important to navigate in these environments because it helps myself. Actually, it helps me in the way I'm going to teach. It helps me as an activist, as a feminist, but especially as a human being. And sometimes I think you label people so much and we forget that we are human beings, how we can connect to it with each others. So for me, it's not just, you are a professor at MIT. Yeah, but I'm a human being and I try to understand my community because when I do that, it maybe it will bring tools to me to write a book, to deepen my reflection when I am talking about speaking place. Who can speak? I know that my hairdressers, she cannot speak. People in Brazil do not value what she has to say because she comes from a social position marked by deep inequalities. So I can, what she says resonate in me because even though she's a conservative, we come from the same social position. We came from the same social position. Working class families, black families in Brazil. So we experience it, similar things, even though I am at MIT and she's a hairdresser.
And let's reclaim the word woke that people don't, I mean, the awakeness, which has to do with discourse analysis or understanding the language. You, obviously, you're an authority in the concept, I mean, one of the leading authorities in discourse analysis, and she is not. And I think that that's the difference, is that she hasn't gone through analyzing that a lot. Again, it's not what she is saying, it's what's speaking through her. So, Djamila, how do you go to there what's speaking through her for your interlocutor, and most especially for yourself? How you detect yourself, your own internalized racism or your own internalized sexism? How did, like, you see it in others when you're saying, I listen to what they're saying, but then how do you see what's speaking through you? And how do you use that then as a tool to then write and philosophize, and in terms of your own self-deconstruction or self-analysis, or and understand, like, the struggle that you're also have all this, I mean, all of us, we have the language speaking through us, and the racist discourse and sexist discourses, like, speaking through us, right? That we and our families, I mean, all the institutional and also our life experience, I mean, all of that, that is speaking through us, that we think, that we're saying, but it's actually,
Well, I was the first one, as I said, to go to university, but in my family, I am the only one. So my uncles, they are very, they are not aware about racism, even though they are black men. So they don't know how to conceptualize racism. They reproduce sexism. They can be very conservative. So for me, it's like in my own family. So I am the only one who had the opportunity to go to university, and actually because my father, he was part of the Black Liberation Movement. So since I was a little child, I have contact with this kind of reflection. So it was so important to me to be born and raised inside the Black Liberation Movement in Brazil. So since I was a little girl, I knew what racism was, even though it was very difficult to me to deal with that at schools. At school, it was very difficult to me when I was a child. I have to deal with a lot of discrimination. My teachers, they were not prepared to deal with that at my time. So even though at home my father was a communist, my father was one of the founders of the Communist Party in Santos, coastal town in São Paulo. So I was raised in this kind of political environment. So, but even though, family tries, my family tried to do their part, but then I went to school. And at school, I was dealing with a lot of discrimination, a lot of racism. It was very difficult to me to, navigate between these two environments. So when I was at home, my father was like, you are a black girl, you are beautiful, you are intelligent. He was reading to us. He took us to have chess classes. I know how to play chess. I was a champion in my city. At the same time, I had to go to school. You are ugly. Your history is not important. My teachers was not teaching about the Black history the way they should be. So for me, it was very difficult. So when I was at home, I was talking to my father and saying, I'm not beautiful. You are, I'm not. At school, they are mocking my hair. They are mocking my skin color. For me, it was very difficult to navigate. My father, no, you can't straighten your hair. You have to accept your hair. And I was like, it's because not you. They're not mocking you. So very difficult to me. But when I was growing older, I could understand more, and I could empower myself and understand that the problem is not mine, and the problem was the problem of that society. It's not my problem, but it was very difficult to me when I was a child to understand.
Especially because you still have to do the work of unlearning, and because you still part of it. I mean, the discourse, part of it you internalize inevitably because it's part of your environment.
Internalize it, and in Brazil at that time, in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 90s, turn on the television, only blonde woman. You couldn't see any Black person in a country where 54% of the population is Black. So it was very difficult to me to understand. But then, when I was about 18 years old, I started to work in a Black feminist organization, and that work saved my life. Because although my father was an activist, he was a man. And I could see at home how my father was sexist. And it was very funny because my father, as a husband, he was difficult. But as a father, it's interesting. He was not, because for him it was important for me, my sister, my brothers, my siblings, all of us to study. He didn't make a difference between the sons and the daughters, and it make all the difference. And we know that in Brazil that they can make this difference. So my father, at the same time that he was, very difficult as a husband, with me and my sister, he was like, you have to study because you are a woman. I know how men are. I don't want you depend on men. I want my daughters, to have formal education. I don't want you to depend on men, right? And I was like 10 years old. Okay. Oh, right.
Like that, I just want to go outside and play.
Okay, I'm going to study. So he used to work in the port. He worked all his time there, and he was like, I'm here working a lot, killing myself to give you education. You have to play chess, to speak English. He was a communist, so for his life, you have to learn the language of the enemy. It's important. And I was like, okay, I will do that. So it's interesting. My father, he was a very interesting person, human being. And it was very important that I had Joaquim, my father, as a father, because it was very important to me to raise awareness on racism. But when I started to work in this organization, I could answer my questions about sexism. Because even though he was activist, he was a man. And this organization was a feminist organization. And it was, for me, changed my world. When I started working there, there was a library there. The name of the library was Carolina Maria de Jesus, who was a very important writer in Brazil. So I knew about Carolina Maria de Jesus. And I started to know the world through the lens of the women. And for me, it changed everything. It was the first time that when I read Toni Morrison, which is my favorite writer. The first time I read Angela Davis, Lélia Gonzalez, Bell Hooks, and for me it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. It's not my problem. All these women, for the first time for me, was like, wow, I can be a thinker as well. I can be a writer as well. And that word for me, when I said Black women saved my life, and women saved my life in general, is because of that. And for sure, because my background, because of my father, and because of my mother as well, because in Brazil, people always say, oh, you are now a professor because
It's
your
just that now that you
father...
read, sorry to interrupt, but when you're saying, because it's like the point of the panel, so now you get to speak, because if Toni Morrison can say that I now have permission to speak.
I have permission to speak. I have permission to exist in another possibility. Because at my time, the possibilities for me were, you can be a samba dancer, or you can be, I don't know, these stereotypes. But you can imagine a black girl, a nerd, because I was a nerd, playing chess. So people are like, how come do you play chess? You know, no, you have to do this, you have to do that. So it was, for me, it was very difficult to understand that I could be other possibilities. And the first time when I was at Casa de Cultura da Mulher Negra, the name of the organization was like, the word starts to make sense to me. So I can be a writer. These women, they were there writing, reflecting about wonderful things. And for me, it was like, the first time I read The Bluest Eye, for me, was like, oh my gosh. You know, so it was very important to me to have this kind of opportunity to be with these women when I was a teenager. But at the same time, to value the work of my mother. Because in Brazil, people say, oh, your father this, your father that. And I ask, what about my mother? Okay, my father, he supported my education. He really inspired me to learn more. Okay, but who was at home cleaning the house, cooking the meals? So
The invisible unpaid labor that the capitalism, like just takes for granted in the nuclear family,
the role of care. So, no, my mom was important as my father was important. So for me, when I became a feminist, it was important to me to value the work of my mother, because I was raised to not be like my mother. And my father was like, I don't want you to be like your mother. So when I was little, I was like, I don't want to be like my mother, you know? And then you become a mother yourself. And you see, so today for me is like the work that my mom did. You know, my mom, she was a warrior. My mom, she died when she was 51. And she had cancer. But maybe you can say that she died from racism and sexism. My mom, she couldn't have the opportunity to dream. You know, she was born in a family of 7 children. She was a domestic worker before marrying my father. And after marrying my father, she continued to do the domestic work. And even though she could raise 4 children and did that in an incredible way, of course, she had her limits, I understand. But at the same time, I have to value what my mom did and value the work of millions of women, not only in Brazil, but in different countries that are doing this invisible work. So my father, he managed to work and to have his life and to go to the meetings with this Communist Party,
washing his clothes,
because my mom was there taking care of everything. So for me, when I became a feminist, it was important to me to look to my mom with the lens of love, because I was raised to, to not see my mom with eyes of admiration. So I truly admire what my mom did.
That's one of the things that you had to unlearn completely, and then be able to actually the opposite, instead of not wanting to be like her, to admire her.
And my mom, she couldn't speak, you know?
Yeah. And Djamila, tell us a little bit about your relationship with your mom and your academic trajectory, when you're telling her about the subjects that you're learning, and at which point she died in your career. Did she live to see you graduate?
No, both of them. My mom died in 2001, and my father died in 2002. So when I was 22 years old, both of them have already passed away. So they couldn't see, actually, because I was even in college. I was actually, at that time, I was studying journalism in Santos, but they couldn't see.
I did not know that.
Yes, I studied journalism in a private university in Santos. They couldn't. But as I am from Candomblé, I believe that they are seeing everything. But the efforts that both of them did, worth it, because if I am here to, of course, public policies, a lot of things, but especially because I was born and raised in that family that since I was a little girl told me that the world could be more for me. So you have the right to learn, you have the right to, you know, to be more. My father, he was like, you know, he took us to the theater, for instance, and then before the film starts, he was like, stand up. Oh, I know, okay. How many black people are here? Only we, father. That's why you have to study. That's why. So I was born like that, you know? All the time. Stand up. And they were like, me and my siblings, oh, again. How many black people? Just us. Now you understand, because you have to study. So when I was a child, I was like, oh, it's so boring. But today, my father saved me from alienation. So since I was a little girl, so for him, it was impossible to us to watch television, the normal TV channels. You have only to watch the educative channels. So when he was out working, you were there watching the things, and he arrived, oh, okay, the educative programs. So it was very important. When you are little, you don't understand. You think it's boring. Oh, my friends, they are there playing. And imagine, I was born in a coastal town. All of my friends, they were there in the beach, having fun. And my father, no, today you have to go to a meeting in the Communist Party because you have to understand, you know, capitalism, you have to understand the class oppression. And it was like, oh, okay. So, but it was very important.
Had it not been for that, we wouldn't.
It helped me actually in my work, in my academic work. My father was a very intelligent man who didn't have the chance to have formal education, but was a very intelligent man. So
self-taught also, like
yeah. So you can. So for me, it was important when I was writing the book. So who have the social privilege have the epistemic privilege. So my father, he couldn't have formal education, not because he was not intelligent or because he was not, you know, working enough, disciplined. It's because he came from a social position where he haven't had the same opportunities to study and to have a better life. So it's not because we do not want to be. It's because we come from a social position. So speaking place is not about what we speak. It's about the place we speak from. And in generally, especially in philosophy, this invention of the universal subject, so on. So they think that they are universal.
the core of logocentric
and you are
thought,
specific. So when I say white man, is as a category, is not as an individual. Please don't be offended. So a white man, he can look at you and say, you are specific because you are a woman. He can look to me and say, you are specific because you are a black woman. I am universal. But the thing is, he's also specific. But they do not see himself as a specific being, that he also speaks from a social position, the position of privilege, the position of power. And white people, they don't see themselves as a race. They point out to me and say, you are black. I am a human being. But you are also a race. And that's the problem, because they don't put themselves in this equation, because they put themselves as universal and the rest as the other. So when Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex, she coined the concept of the other to say that the woman is the other of the man. And then Grada Quilomba, in her work, a Portuguese thinker, said, black woman, she's the other of the other. She's the both opposition of masculinity and whiteness. So help us to understand this position. So, and the thing is that the white man, he puts himself here, I am the universal, you are all specifics. And when you say you are also specific, of course, he doesn't like. You are not talking from a neutral position. The knowledge is not neutral. And speaking place is about that. And that's why I think a lot of people resist to understand the concept, because it's easier to point out you are a woman, but it's difficult to understand that he is a man and how his position as a man affects our position as women.
He's telling us, all men are created equal right there. Like all men are
Exactly.
created equal is the concept. Like, okay,
Exactly.
where are the rest of us,
Exactly.
Right?
And this is the thing. So when we as Black people that historically haven't had the right to speak, we start to speak, of course, you will bring uncomfortable truths. And people who were historically in this position of privilege, they will feel a discomfort when we speak.
They have to do yoga then to sit with the discomfort,
Exactly. So when we speak, they feel this discomfort because historically we were not able to do that. So when we start to do that and start to confront, to refute these perspectives, so they started to be in this position of discomfort that we were historically in this position. I was born in an uncomfortable position as a Black woman. So all the time have to justify myself, all the time had
You don't even know where the comfortable position is,
Exactly. So this is the problem. I think that's why the concept of speaking place in certain groups, people resist to understand because they don't want to put themselves in this position of, discomfort, and they don't want to understand that we are relational beings. So if there is a group being discriminated, there is a group that is discriminating. So racism is not only about Black people. It's not about only Blackness. It's about whiteness as well. And the thing is, people think, racism is about Blackness. No, it's about whiteness. Whiteness as this position of power, whiteness as this position of privilege. So it's important to white people to understand that we are in relations. And of course, they have to put themselves in this equation, because if there is racism, there is a group that created that, and who is the group who are historically being benefit from that? So racism is a talk that white people have to start to be part of as well.
Thank you, Djamila. This is so fascinating. My God, like the time just flew. We're technically out of time, but 2 questions from the audience. Yes. Renata, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much again for being here. So thank you so much for being here again. Yesterday was amazing. Today even more. I'm very emotional to be here listening to you. I have 2 questions because I couldn't ask mine yesterday. So I have a brother. He's older, and he is the one who taught me how to dream, how to be here and take my position as a Black woman, as an immigrant, and all the above. So I would like to know who taught you how to dream. I know your father taught you like the politics, your mom took care of you, but who really taught you how to be able to get there, even when you didn't know that you could? And my second question is, I have a project here. I had the chance to talk to you a little bit about yesterday, but it's basically to trace the Black Brazilian people who lives here in Canada, still a bit local, Quebec and Ontario, but my intention is to go around Canada with this project. And it's an achievement that I could never imagine. Thank you so much, by the way, to the embassy, to the Brazilian embassy here in Montreal. So this is my big dream as of now. What is your next big dream?
Well, I guess beyond my family, for sure, the feminists that I had the chance to read when I was younger helped me to dream. Not only the feminists, but the authors, the female authors that I had the chance to read when I was younger, helped me to, to understand that I could also be a writer and a scholar and so on. So I think I always say that women saved me. When I say that, because when I read the work of these women, for me it was so important. It was a life changer for me because I could see myself, and I also could have, I guess, the strength to do that, because it's not easy. Sometimes you know you can, you know it's possible, but you don't have the courage to do that. So I say that in one of my books, Letters to My Grandmother. I say that it's a memoir book. I say that my father, he taught me all of it. It was important to have the access to the knowledge. But my mom and other women helped me to have the courage. And when you are a Black woman, you have to have both, knowledge and courage. Because just knowledge is not enough if you don't have the courage. And courage is not enough if you don't have the knowledge. So I guess that for me it was this combination that helped me to realize that I could be where I am today. And for me, it was my big dream. I always say that my dream is to grow older. Because my mom, when she passed away, she was 51 years old. So for me, it's so important to grow older and to see my daughter grow older as well. I have a daughter, she's 21 years old. She's studying mathematics in Brazil, in the best university in Brazil. And she's there, at 21, studying mathematics because I had the chance to study before, and you could break this cycle of exclusion that was imposed by racism and sexism in our country. So I want to grow older. That's my dream. But to grow old healthy, I want to be very healthy. I want to be, a very old woman, because when you are old, you have this poetic license to be very boring. And I want to be, that old woman who say, "What is that? What are you doing?" And people say, "Oh, don't bother, she's old. Don't care about that." So I really want to be old. But because in my family, people died so young. Imagine 51 is so young. I'm 45, 51, you were so young.
I'm 51, so.
Yeah, you have, So for me, is that I want to grow older. And yeah, for me, this is my biggest dream, to grow older. Maybe die when I am 100, I guess.
A long life to Djamila and Renata.